everyone. Thank you very much for signing in and watching my live stream. I'm Mr. Matt, and this is Dr. Tot. Dr. Tot, you want a cookie for class? Very good. And welcome to SAT, ACT Prep. We're going to continue our work with some miscellaneous practice sets. So we're going to go through a pair of SAT, ACT questions each, and we're going to repeat them 3 times, just so you get ample exposure to those types of subtopics. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. If you have questions at any point, then please let me know. If you find these videos helpful, then please feel free to subscribe and hit the like button. I appreciate it very much. And just a reminder that there is a little bit of a delay because this is a live session. There is a little bit of a delay with the iPad, but I'll try and mitigate that as much as possible. So let's look at 1 and 2. Question number 1 asks, Michael hiked at a constant pace along a trail on a 12-mile hike. 40 minutes into the hike, he passes campsite A, and 80 minutes after that, he passes the 8-mile marker. If campsite B is 2 miles from the end of the hike, how long in minutes will it take Michael to get from campsite A to campsite B? Number 2 asks, if 2 sides of a triangle are 3 and 8, which of the following could be the length of the third side? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and 2 minutes in, I'll start to solve to give you some hints. Okay, so for number one, if he hiked along a 12-mile hike, the key here is really to draw a diagram. So if we represent the hike on a number line from 0 to 12, so it's a 12-mile hike, and 40 minutes into the hike, he passes campsite A. So in the first notch, I'm going to label that point A, and on top of it, I'm going to write 40 minutes, because that's the only information I know corresponding to that point in the hike. After 40 minutes, it says 80 minutes after that, he passes the 8-mile marker. So in 40 plus 80 minutes, which would be 120 minutes, he goes 8 miles. So his rate, we can ascertain from that point what rate he's walking at or hiking at. So it took him 120 minutes to go 8 miles. So that's the rate that you're going to be using for this problem, because it says that he hiked at a constant pace. Then it says campsite B is 2 miles from the end of the hike. So we know the hike is 12 miles long. So campsite B would have to be at mile marker 10. They want to know how long in minutes will it take Michael to get from campsite A to campsite B. So campsite A took him 40 minutes to get at, walking at a rate of 8 miles over 120 minutes. Now, it's important to understand when working with rates, you can flip rates around however you need them, depending on the unit that you need to eliminate. So starting with 40 minutes, if I multiply 40 minutes times his rate of walking or hiking, which is 8 miles over 120 minutes, notice I can take the rate as it's listed, as I originally listed it, because in that order, with the miles being in the numerator and the minutes being in the denominator, if I write this guy, if I write 40 minutes as a fraction by just putting it over 1, you'll see that minutes cancel with minutes, and my answer is in terms of miles, which is what I want. So you can use the units to make sure that you did the math, the correct operations, that you multiplied by the correct fraction. If you got something like miles over minutes squared, that doesn't make any sense. Minutes squared is a unit of acceleration, and that doesn't make any sense in this problem. So if you got that unit, you know that you did something wrong. You need to go back and check, because they should eliminate. So we know that campsite A, let me just check that. So we have 40 minutes times 8 miles divided by 120 minutes. Yeah, and that gives you a nasty fraction of 2.66. So that's 2 2/3 of a mile. So A is 2 2/3 miles into the hike. Now they want to know how long it's going to take him to go from campsite A to campsite B. Campsite B is at mile marker 10. So if we subtract from 10 to 2 2/3, you're going to get 7 1/3, or 7.3 bar. So if we now have a distance of 7 1/3 mile, and we want to see how long it's going to take him in minutes to walk that distance, we're going to multiply by his rate of hiking. But you're going to have to manipulate the rate. You're going to have to flip it around, because now we're starting with miles, and we want to cancel miles with miles to end up with minutes. We don't want to end up with a unit like miles over minutes squared. That doesn't make any sense. Or I'm sorry, minutes over miles squared. Miles squared would be a unit of area, like square miles. And that doesn't make sense in the context of this problem. So multiplying by the flipped rate of 120 minutes per every 8 miles, which if you think about it, that makes sense. You can think about them in either direction. It either takes him he can go 8 miles per every 120 minutes, or it's 120 minutes per every 8 miles, right? It's just, we usually think of it as miles over time, or distance over time, but you can flip them around and it actually does still make conceptual sense. So multiplying here, then the miles will cancel out, and 7 1/3 times 120 divided by 8, I got 110, which is closest to answer selection B. So I probably should have put in here which of the following is closest to the amount of time it'll take him to go from campsite A to campsite B. But as long as you got the process down and that makes sense, then you should feel confident about that. If you have any questions, then please let me know. You can either drop a question in the live chat feed or put a comment in the comment section below. Number 2 involves the Pythagorean inequalities. So a lot of students are familiar with the Pythagorean theorem, but the Pythagorean theorem can only be used with right triangles. The Pythagorean inequalities can be used with any triangle, and they describe the minimum and maximum possibilities of any potential third side length in a triangle. So if you have two sides of a triangle, let me call the red side A and the green side B. And I'm trying to imagine or list out all the possible third side lengths. Because notice, if I increase the angle measure between the red side and the green side, if I increase the angle, I necessarily increase that third side length. If I decrease the angle, then the side length across from it will also decrease. Triangles have very specific angle to side proportionalities, and that's where trigonometry comes in as a mathematical study, a whole mathematical field unto itself. So the third side length is dependent on the angle that it's opposite. As you change the measure of the opposite angle, you necessarily change the length of the opposite side that you would need to complete a full triangle. There is a mathematical way of calculating this, though, because notice, if I were to sum these two sides, if I were to lay them flat next to each other like this, so I have side length B in green and side length A in red. And notice, so this whole distance here would be the same thing as A plus B. Notice that if I try and make a triangle with a side length that's larger than the sum of the other two sides, it's not possible. It's physically not possible. Because the side that I made in black ink would always extend out past the sum of the other two parts, so you'd never get those two side lengths to actually connect. The same is true about the difference. If instead of laying them next to each other, if I overlapped them, so this is B, if instead I drew A like this, notice now this little distance right here represents the difference between the sides, B minus A. If I try and draw a triangle that has a side length smaller than the difference between the two side lengths, I'm again never going to be able to get those two side lengths to actually touch. The black side and the red side would never be able to actually physically touch and create an actual triangle. So these are the Pythagorean inequalities. The third side length, let me write it like this. The third side length has to be greater than the difference of the other two sides and less than the sum. So if two side lengths are 3 and 8, if I add them together, I get 11. 3 plus 8 is 11. This third side length must be less than 11. If you try and pick 11 or any other value greater than 11, you physically cannot make a triangle. It's physically impossible. And the same thing for the difference. So 8 minus 3. Make sure you take the larger one minus the smaller one. You can't have a negative side length. So remember, order matters with subtraction. You need to make sure that you end up with a positive difference, a positive answer, because having a negative side length in a triangle would mean like the side length's like collapsing into itself. It doesn't make physical sense. So 8 minus 3 is 5, so the third side length has to be greater than 5. So the limitations on this third side length is that it has to be greater than 5 but less than 11. Only 9 is greater than 5 and less than 11. Not less than or equal to, it's less than 11, so 11 won't work itself. But 10.99999, that would work. Okay, if you have any questions, then please let me know. And these, that question got mixed up. I actually want to keep one going in the clusters, so we'll go back to 3 and 4. 5 and 6, so I'm skipping over 3 and 4 because I want to make sure that we get multiple examples of the type of question we just did. So the next two questions, Michael hiked at a constant pace along a trail on an 18-mile hike. 60 minutes into the hike, he passes campsite A, and 140 minutes after that, he passes the 8-mile marker. If campsite B is 4 miles from the end of the hike, how long in minutes will it take Michael to get from campsite A to campsite B? Question number 6 asks, if two sides of a triangle are 10 and 20, which of the following could be the length of the third side? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and then 2 minutes in we'll solve. Okay, so for number 5, we know that he goes 60 minutes into the hike and then he passes, excuse me, campsite A. So the first mark on my number line, I wrote A and 60 minutes. Then 140 minutes after that, meaning in total 200 minutes into the hike, he passes the 8-mile marker. So we can take from that point, we can calculate his pace. That's going to be 8 miles every 200 minutes. So I'm going to go back and figure out with that rate how far campsite A is into his hike. So if you take 60 minutes times his rate of 8 miles over 200 minutes, you're going to get 2.4 miles. So campsite A is at 2.4 miles into the hike. Campsite B, they say, is 4 miles from the end of the hike. So 18 miles minus 4 miles would be the 14th mile. So we're going to go from campsite A, which is at 2.4 miles into the hike, to campsite B, which is 14 miles into the hike. 14 minus 2.4 is going to be 11.6. 11.6 times 200 divided by 8 miles, because we're multiplying by the flipped rate. Notice that I flipped the rate there to make sure that miles cancels with miles. So 11.6 times 200 over 8 is going to give you 290. Whoops. So it's going to take him 290 minutes to get from campsite A to campsite B, and that's answer selection A. For number 6, two sides of a triangle are 10 and 20. Which of the following could be the length of the third side? So we need to take the sum and the difference of the two side lengths. So 10 plus 20 is 30. That means the third side length has to be less than 30. 20 minus 10 is 10, so the third side length has to be greater than 10. The only answer selection that is less than 30 and greater than 10 is answer selection A, which is 20. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's look at 9 and 10, and we'll circle back to the other problems. Question number 9 asks, Michael hiked at a constant pace along a trail on a 22-mile hike. 80 minutes into the hike, he passes campsite A, and 220 minutes after that, he passes the 10-mile marker. If campsite B is 6 miles from the end of the hike, how long in minutes will it take Michael to get from campsite A to campsite B? And question number 10, if two sides of a triangle are 6 and 38, which of the following could be the length of the third side? I'll give you 6 minutes, and 2 minutes in, I'll start to solve. Okay, so with number 9, if we draw a number line and from 0 to 22, because it's a 22-mile hike, we know that 80 minutes in he passes campsite A, and 220 minutes after that, so 80 plus 220 would be 300 minutes into the hike, he passes the 10-mile marker. So we know that he hikes at a rate of 10 miles every 300 minutes. So that's the rate that we're going to use. Campsite A took him 80 minutes to get to, so if we take 80 minutes times his rate of 10 miles every 300 minutes, you're going to get 2 2/3 miles. So make sure that you use fractions there because that's an repeating decimal. 16, it says that campsite B is 6 miles from the end of the height, so 22 minus 6 is 16, so campsite B is at the 16th mile marker. So 16 minus 2 2/3 miles would represent the distance between campsite A and campsite B. That's going to be 13 1/3 miles. And if we multiply that by the inverse of the rate that we originally wrote, because we want to make sure that miles cancel with miles. So I multiplied 13 1/3 miles times 300 minutes over 10 miles. And when you do that, you're going to get 400 minutes. So the answer here was D. For 10, I apologize, I had to change one of the answer selections to make this work. So if two sides of a triangle are 6 and 38, then if we take the sum of the two side lengths, that's going to describe the upper bound of the possible third side length. If we take the difference of the two sides, that's going to describe the lower bound of the possible third side length. So 6 plus 38 is going to be 44. So the third side length has to be less than 44. 38 minus 6 is 32, so the third side length has to be greater than 32. So the third side length has to be greater than 32 and less than 44, so I changed answer selection C to 42 to make sure that that fit in between that interval. So the answer here was C. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's go back to a new type of problem, or two pairs of problems. Question number 3 asks, out of the total 528 families that belong to a community outreach group, 312 families have a dog and 364 families have a cat. How many families have both a dog and a cat? And question number 4, if angle B has a measure of 38 degrees and side length AC is 4, which of the following is closest to the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle below? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and 2 minutes in, I'll start to solve. Okay, so for number 3, with this type of problem where you have a portion that's included in the totals, so here, if a family has a dog, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a cat. So that's the problem here, that there are some families that have both dogs and cats, and you can tell that that's what's going on because if you take the 312 families that have a dog and you add it to the 364 families that have a cat, you end up with a number 676, which is greater than the total number of families that are at this community outreach group in the first place. So that doesn't really make sense. There has to be something else going on. And the something else going on is that there are in fact some families that have both a cat and a dog. So if you use a Venn diagram to represent the middle portion, to represent the families that have both a cat and a dog, and we call that number x, then we know that 312 minus x, 312 families that have a dog, minus x number of families that have both a dog and a cat, would be equal to the number of families that have only a dog. Likewise, 364 families that have a cat minus x number of families that have a cat and a dog would give you the number of families that have only a cat. So if we take those two expressions and add them together, then 312 minus x plus 364 minus x is equal to 528. So we get 676 minus 2x is equal to 528. Subtracting 676 on both sides, we get negative 2x is equal to negative 148. And then dividing by negative 2, you're going to find that x is equal to 74. So there are 74 families that have both a cat and a dog. For number 4, we need to use trigonometry. So remember the acronym SOHCAHTOA. So sine is the ratio of the opposite side to the hypotenuse, cosine is the adjacent side to the hypotenuse, and tangent is the opposite side to the adjacent side. So here we are given the angle measure of B, and we're also given side length AC to be 4, and they're asking about the hypotenuse. So we have the angle measure of B, so we're labeling everything, or we're thinking about everything from the perspective of angle B. From angle B, side length AC, which they told us is 4, is the opposite side length. Remember that it changes depending on from which angle you're referring, or from which perspective you're you're looking. So from angle B's perspective, side length AC is 4. The hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse because it's always going to be the side length opposite the 90-degree angle measure. So that won't change, but the opposite and the adjacent side lengths will change depending on what angle you come from. So from B, we have the opposite and we're looking for the hypotenuse, so that's the sine function. So we can write an equation saying that the sine of the angle 38 degrees is equal to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. The opposite side here is 4, so we can write the equation the sine of 38 is equal to 4 over x, x being the hypotenuse that we're solving for. If I multiply by x and then divide by the sine of 38, trying to get x by itself, x is equal to 4 divided by the sine of 38, and that's going to give you about 6.49, which is closest to answer selection D, which is 6.5. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's look at 7 and 8. So question number 7 asks, out of the total 560 families that belong to a community outreach group, 420 families have a dog and 380 families have a cat. How many families have both a dog and a cat? And question number 8, if angle B has a measure of 52 degrees and side length AB is 6, which of the following is closest to the length of the hypotenuse in the right triangle below? So I'll give you 6 minutes and then I'll start to solve after 2. Okay, so for number 7, again, if we use a Venn diagram, we can use the center portion of the diagram to represent families that have both a cat and a dog, and label that X because it's unknown. So if 420 families have a dog, then 420 minus X families have only a dog because they could have a dog and a cat. If 380 families have a cat, then 380 minus X families would have only a cat. So 420 minus X plus 380 minus X has to equal the 560 families in total. So then we combine like terms and get 800 minus 2x is equal to 560. Subtracting 800 on both sides, we're going to get negative 2x is equal to negative 240. Dividing by negative 2, you're going to find x is equal to 120. So there are 120 families that have both a cat and a dog. For number 8, if angle B has a measure of 52 degrees and side length AB is 6, now from the perspective of angle B, we have the adjacent side. AB is the adjacent now, not the opposite like in the other question. But we have the adjacent side, and we're looking for the hypotenuse, so that's cosine in the SOHCAHTOA acronym. So cosine is equal to the ratio of the adjacent side length to the hypotenuse, or adjacent divided by hypotenuse. So we can say that the cosine of 52 is equal to 6 divided by x, x being the unknown hypotenuse's length. Multiplying by x on both sides just to move it over to the left side, so then we can get the cosine of 52 over to the right. And then, so multiplying by x and then dividing by the cosine of 52, we're going to get x is equal to 6 divided by cosine of 52, which is going to be about 9.74, which, looking at the answer selections, is closest to answer selection A, which is about 10. Well, the answer selection A is 10, 9.74 is about 10. And let's look at the last pair of questions for today. Number 11, out of the total 528 families that belong to a community outreach group, 312 families have a dog and 364 families have a cat. How many families have both a dog and a cat? And number 12, if angle B has a measure of 42 degrees and the side length AC is 8 units long, which of the following is closest to the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle below? So I'll give you 6 minutes. After about 2 minutes, I'll start to solve. Okay, so for number 11, if we represent the number of families that have both a dog and a cat as being x, then 312 families that have a dog minus x number that have both a dog and a cat would be equal to an expression of 312 minus x, which would represent the number of families that have only a dog. The 364 families that have a cat minus the x number of families that have only that have a dog and a cat would leave you with an expression representing the number of families that have only a cat. So if we add those two expressions together, 312 minus x plus 364 minus x is going to give us 676 minus 2x, and that has to be equal to 528. And I do apologize here. I think this carries on from number 2, and I didn't change. There's a typo with the problem repeated itself. So this should have been 74, which doesn't match up with the answer selection, so I just told you to answer it as a grid-in. So I do apologize, but you should have, as long as you got the answer of 74, you know that you are on the right track. For 12, we're back to requiring sine as a trigonometric function because we have the opposite side length respective to the angle B. Side length AC would be the opposite side. So we have the opposite, and we're looking for the hypotenuse. That's governed by the trigonometric function of sine. So the sine of 42 degrees has to be equal to the opposite side of 8 divided by the unknown side length of the hypotenuse, which we'll describe as just x. So x times the sine of 42 is equal to 8. So x is equal to 8 divided by the sine of 42. That's going to be 11.95, which is closest to 12. If you have any questions on anything that we've done today, then please let me know in the comment section below. But otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And Dr. Tot, do you want to say goodbye to everybody? Come on. Come on, you want to say goodbye? Come on. No, you got to do your work. Come on. He just wants a treat. Come on, you got to say goodbye. And you sit. You say bye. Can you say bye? Come on, you say bye. Come on, bye. That's a paw, right? Okay, very good. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you find these videos helpful, then please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk to you all on Monday.